Recording in progress. Okay, that means recording pause.
That's one, and that's one of the views that I need. And then from that view, I would obviously start creating different views individually. So I created a view and then I set that aside. I create another view with different files. I set that aside. And then eventually I would like to see maybe these views side by side so that I can relate them one to another or see what's different between them, or even complement and seeing connections between them. So I think my experience has a lot to do with understanding complexity. And I think VR gives you a lot of freedom to quickly clean the table to put more things on top of the table, or clean the wall to have more things on the wall, like a fresh wall every time I need it, and to putting these different combinations of media in a fresh environment.
And do you feel comfortable that you can prepare such a directory of content efficiently, or most of it, and then maybe having a way to pull others, let's say, I don't know, Wikipedia page or something that you didn't think of? Because that's
that makes sense, of course. If I need something that is not there, I should be able to pull it up. In that point, I think we're getting to a moment where voice search is extremely good for at least for English, right? So if I'm going to open up Wikipedia, I want to kind of like the Apple remote has the little microphone for Siri, so I can just say open Wikipedia, and then a web page for Wikipedia opens up. Or I can just say I can press and hold a button and say search Wikipedia for Doug Engelbart, and then a new page opens up in the screen for Doug Engelbart, and I can set that aside. But I don't want to do any typing in VR. I feel like it makes absolute no sense to do any sort of typing in VR. Only for me, manipulation and organization. I think that would be incredible for me with voice activated commands.
Just on that last bit there, and Peter, I see you have your hand up, but just on what Raphael said, this is where our discussion, Raphael, on what VR is today as opposed to what it was recently kind of diverges a little bit, because I don't do a lot of typing in my Oculus, but if I'm in a meeting with someone, to have my normal laptop screen and keyboard there is actually really useful. And the quality is good enough. Of course, it's not a Retina display, but it is as good as what we had before we got Retina, I think. So considering that this is only going to get better and better, yes, absolutely agree. VR has so many more affordances, but I don't think we should discount typing entirely. By the way, somebody added something clever to their responses. I had written interaction with tools. Of course, interaction with body is also very clever. So I've added that as an option because clearly we all agree on that one. Peter.
Okay, I'm posting in a link to a Webrx emulator extension, which allows the Chrome and Firefox browsers to simulate using a headset without a headset on. So what it'll do is it'll draw each eye's version of the scene, and it will also put a little 3D model of the headset and controller, and you have a set of selections between what kind of device you want it to be emulating. So it'll adjust the graphics accordingly. And then if you just like stare at the screen and let your eyes defocus, you'll actually get a narrow sliver of 3D. It's not the full immersion, but if you're working primarily in 2D, it might be of value to you. The trouble is getting the width of your browser window to the sweet spot. If you have the browser window too wide, your eyes just won't focus on it. But as you slowly close up the window, narrowing the view, you hit the point when suddenly it just snaps into 3D for you.
Okay.
Next, I have an unrelated point, and that's that I was going through some of the documentation for the Babylon JS 3D modeling language and system, and apparently it has one Achilles heel, and that currently it's not able to project web pages into the VR world. So if you want to be able to have a web page on a board or a mural in the 3D space, you'll have to capture a bitmap image of what it looks like from an off-screen buffer and then map that on, but it won't be interactive. So they said the other possibility is to effectively parse the HTML that would be the web page and then generate VR world equivalents for everything, which seems like it'd be a lot easier for us to be using visual meta instead of reaching in to the original web page source code in HTML. And then now jumping back now to the typing in the VR world, the one advantage that a command line kind of an interface is that you don't have to keep changing your focus. You can use the textual dialogue in one typing environment to switch your focus, as opposed to having to go and first click on board 3, then click on monitor 4, then click on something else to be able to interact. Instead of having basically have a unified command line where you can just textually say, you know, put X on board 4. So what I'm thinking is that we might want to have sort of a domain-specific language to describe importing data and throwing it on different surfaces in the VR world, and use text to do that. Or maybe in a secondary window, have a conventional web page controller that could be interoperating with the VR world to give us a menu system and some nice convenient affordances for expressing those utterances. Or maybe the speech recognition will get good enough that we can simply say, you know, put report number 2 on screen 4 and have it automatically handle that routing for us.
Peter, that can already be done. This is why I really need you to at least try in Oculus, because, for instance, if you use Immersive, which was the company that we saw a while ago, you can choose to have quite a few virtual monitors, and they will behave like they are your Mac. So you can just literally drag a window to another screen. So when it comes to having multiple screen devices in VR, it's already there. And for what it is, it's quite useful. So that's why I really think we should try to, maybe you can find someone you can borrow it or something. Because once you've tried it on, and like Chris Gutteridge tried it on here this week, and he found many issues with it. There are many issues with it, but they're a bit different when you've had it on your head. Fabian.
Yeah, couple of points to bounce back on this. It's first, there is a famous demo from honestly, I can't remember it, but a researcher from the 70s at the Media Lab on put left jar behind blue object. So he was using voice recognition for spatially aware manipulation. Honestly, that was mind-blowing back then, still is mind-blowing today, but it doesn't make sense in my opinion in that context because we have those controllers. So I definitely don't want to transform voice to text to movement when I have so much more precision and freedom with those controllers, or also even just hand tracking. So I think for this specifically, I don't want to use command line if I don't have a huge benefit, which is, for example, manipulating 100 windows. I definitely don't want to manipulate 100 windows like this. For this, I want it programmatically. But if it's one or even a couple, this actually, I think, is really valuable, because just like the Post-it note, you hold it and maybe you bring it closer to the screen, like, oh no, actually it doesn't feel right. You have through the movement some kind of feedback that, yeah, it's actually not correct. So I think for this, it's much more both efficient and interesting to be in movement. And I realized something. I'll briefly share the screen because I missed something. This is actually one of the motivation of saying using the controller without the headset. So that person is having the headset plugged in, not putting it on their face, but still using it to control the content that is in their screen. It is nowhere near as nice as if you're in the headset, but as you can see, he's typing on the keyboard. So it provides new or other affordances, differences. When you're here, it's for a bit of different context because he's programming, so he doesn't want to put the headset on, off, type, etc. But that's the example of manipulating with the controllers, still in 3D, so the control is in 3D. The screen is in 2D, so it's not as nice as with a headset, but also efficient in that context. So there are, that's a bit maybe the part that I did not explain very clearly at the beginning, that you still need the controller, you're still doing the 6 degrees of freedom movements, but without the headset on. So you don't have the same perception, but still, for example, grabbing the window there and moving it aside. On the point of the about iframe or rendering websites, indeed, it's not just Babylon.js, it's WebXR in general. You cannot have a page in a page for security reason. That's been the debate since 2016, since I started working in WebVR and WebXR now. So it's exactly as you said, Peter, that you have to basically get an image out of a page. So this is what I do on my wiki. I have an action to render server side the HTML page, and then I get an image out of it, and then I can display that image on the device. Of course, that image is just an image. It's nowhere near as rich as something that's interactive, something that you can click on links, etc. But at least it displays. And to be honest, that's one of the biggest limitation for browsing in VR, but while being immersive. You can still browse normal 2D windows in VR, but not having a, let's say, a browser in your WebXR experience. That's not the case yet. There might be experimental browsers that support it, but let's say the main one, like the default, the Oculus browser, or the Chromium-based ones don't do this. And as far as I can tell, don't plan to do this.
So I think I'm going to share a screen for a minute. There's not that many of us here, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what the responses are already. Because we need to, Bob, this is probably a part that you will find interesting too. So when it comes to the media types, the top 3 are clearly timeline, mural, and documents, which is interesting. Not super surprising. If we do documents, then within documents, these are the kinds of metadata, at least what the document points to and what's in it. The interface aspects, for some reason, I hadn't done the interaction with body, which I think is obvious. We have to do that, so I apologize. So the question was, are we more interested in tools or visualizations or import-export data? Everyone so far has said all of them. And there's some added linguistic interactions, probably you, Peter. And that's very good stuff, but I think that's also transferable to other media, like using Siri and so on. So I'm more focused here on kind of uniquely VR interactions. And under scenarios, you can all see that the learning is currently top, but also a good range of other ones. Interacting with a team is quite low, which I'm happy about, because that is kind of what some of these other companies are doing. Not that it's not important, it most definitely is, but in terms of looking at what we uniquely bring. And then, sorry, it's snapped up. We have what kind of workflows and a few things on everything else. So I think we're getting there. And as I wrote in email and on Twitter, I think, when Chris was here, one of the really useful things he brought up was, in discussions back and forth when we were jousting, was there's a difference between a curated museum experience and being able to take museum items and interact with them. And I think that really helps our discussion, because I'm not suggested that we do like I said, like a CD-ROM for them, where it's all ready-made and that's all you can do. I absolutely think what we need to focus is on a web-based open VR environment, that if they're interested, they can have some extra items in that environment. But the point is how we allow people to interact with it, following the kind of votes that we're having here. Over. No comments? I mean, it's an interesting community we have, and I thought this weekend, well, this week rather, that maybe one of the things we should do was to write like a guide for authors and TV and movie makers for how work in how work in VR may look, because how we're going to disseminate our findings. I thought that would one thing we could do. So that's why I've started looking into what are the things that are interesting, because, you know, Adam's not here today, Alan's not here, no idea where they are. And they all have strong opinions for how we should do it. But, you know, when we don't have a continued dialogue, it's really hard to make decisions and make things happen. So hopefully this kind of a poll, we can figure out where we should put our different attentions on.
Well, it would be, I'm probably going to leave pretty soon, because what really interests me is how we organize information at the chunk level, information chunk level, and then how we put it together visually and otherwise. And so I count on all the coder people and architecture people in VR, and so I count on you guys doing all that job. But it's something that I don't have the time to sit and listen to your discussions about right now.
Did you fill in the survey?
I certainly did.
Okay, because you didn't write that under anything else then. I think what you said,
I did. You look in other and you will see something about structuring information. And that's that might be me, or it might be someone else in the group, but it was me.
Let's see. Okay, structural links. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's one of them. I also mentioned it in the other section, I believe. Anyway,
yeah,
you're interrupting my the flow of my thought right now.
I'm sorry. It sounded like you were done, but Bob, it's not so nice to threaten with leaving because you don't like the way the conversation.
No, I'm not. I am not threatening.
You frequently are. You're saying you're leaving because it's not interesting to you. That's not a very nice way. I mean, I greatly appreciate.
Well, wait a minute. I probably am not very polite in how I depart, but I do have I have interests in particular parts of the discussions, and if that part of the discussions are not happening for me, then I leave. One of the ways of dealing with that sometimes is to have to identify a period of time where that particular elements of discussion are going to be, which I'll participate, and where other parts, that is having to do with, let's say what we've just been discussing, are kind of interesting, but I'm assuming that'll all take place. But I'm really interested in how we organize the information. So I'm not threatening or anything like that. I'm simply saying that there are things that interest me and that in fact are vital, have been vital in my life for the last 40 years, 50 years. In terms, and I've made contributions in, and I intend to continue that, but I cannot spend 4 hours a week on other things when I could be spending it on those. I count on other people. I count on all you folks in the meeting to be doing wonderful things with the virtual reality, interaction stuff.
Right. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, my turn.
Okay.
In terms, it does take time, because you frequently say something like this, and you also say when it's too technical, you'll turn your screen off and all of that. You don't need to say that. You can just turn it off if it's not interesting. But there's quite a bit of that. And also in this community, what we're trying to do is have a journal so that we build some kind of a knowledge thing in general, because the chance of us actually building a coherent thing is almost none, because we're experimenting, as we should. We should try to build something, but the chance it'll happen is very small. So when it comes to that, one thing that I really, really think would be valuable for all of us, if we have an opinion like you do there, why don't you just write a little piece on that and say the bits that I think we need to look into are such and such, and we put it in the journal and we discuss it as a piece there. Like Mark Anderson, he just went through an onboarding process with Oculus, which was awful. I would like to see that as an article. It's important. Mark has now done this kind of knowledge graph in VR, and he's not here today, unfortunately, and he's put things on Twitter. That should be in the journal. I think that would greatly interest you, for one thing, because it is how to build and organize knowledge in a virtual environment. So instead of hoping that we can organize these casual meetings, it's really good if we could have the dialogue kind of rolling. You know what I mean?
Yeah, thank you. I don't have a whole lot of time to write for this kind of thing at this point.
Okay.
So yeah, so I
That's fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, Fabian, I see you have your hand up.
Yes. So to me, what would be more interesting, Bob and anybody who wants to structure information, for example, Raphael, you mentioned it also last time, is to see how you do it today, and it really how you do it when you have, let's say, when you're in the zone, when you're efficient, when you enjoy it, when you solve a problem. The thing is, I don't know how you do it, and I think if you were to just do it in front of me, you know, I would be like maybe a bit lost or confused, etc. So I think it's something, maybe it's just a suggestion, but if you're comfortable with that, it would be, for example, recording your screen. It doesn't have to be live, it can be whenever you're again in the zone. And then after the fact, let's say a 30-minute session, commenting on top of it, or even we do it live and then we can ask questions. Why did you do this? Why did you do that? Is this like a eureka moment? You find structure. And then if you do this, then as a programmer, then I can think, okay, does it make sense to do it in VR or not? Maybe it's actually impractical or you're inefficient or etc. And if it is possible and possibly efficient, then I can try to think of tools, way, metaphor, etc. But otherwise, it's a little bit abstract. And if I just see, for example, if the mural is the output, if I have to, let's say, reverse engineering it through a PDF, it doesn't really help in terms of the process itself. So yeah, to me, that would be maybe not the most efficient, but at least a great first step.
I like that, and I sent you a link in the chat. It's taking a little while to load. Maybe I can share my screen really quickly and show it live. 1 second. Here you go. So this is how I tend to work. This is the living room in my old apartment, and I do things in the computer. I print them out, I cut them up, and I put them on the wall. It's different than using Post-its because Post-its don't give you information architecture. So in this kind of way, I can print titles, I can print subtitles, and I can print little snippets, I can print vertical things. I have a template for my organization. So it's thinking of different blocks of content that you can throw into a virtual wall that you can then reorganize. And this process, it takes place in the computer, in the table, and in the wall. So my flow usually goes around that area. I start in the computer for some things, and some other things I start using a lot of index cards. I still love index cards, and I can organize them on the table. I can move them around, move my ideas around. So if I had this experience in fresh boards all the time, I could, get into this flow state extremely easily, using at least my way of working. But it's not, for example, the main point that I want to get across is that I don't think it's either VR or working with index cards. Like, how can I integrate them both? Maybe I have an index card that I can print that has a little code that once I look at it with the Oculus, it automatically detects and creates a digital card of that. I want to think of these different interactions between the real physical world and the virtual environment. I think it's a combination of both that will bring the best of abilities from us.
And I'd like to see how you organize that wall.
Sure. I'll give you a demo, Bob, later on.
Yeah, but I'm going to insist on Bob's request because it's a little bit like the mural is it's overwhelming. So it's exciting, and I think everybody is quite curious, but at the same time, it's how do you say? And I'm going to say it naively. I don't mean it in an offensive manner, but it's a little bit like bragging, like here is my wall and be impressed. And we were impressed, so there is no question about it. But it doesn't really, the process is difficult. Whereas if it was just saying ideally, if it was time based or evolving over time, we would not necessarily understand, but more likely we'll be able to. So a little example is sometimes, I don't know if you do this, but when I do a presentation, I'm going to do a whiteboard or start a presentation, and then I'm going to either record it or redo it live. Because also if I redo it live, then maybe people do comments and I can update it. So definitely impressed with the board itself or the wall itself. But I think I want to see how it's being built, even if it's of course not the same every time, I imagine. But yeah, that's at least as important as the quote unquote result. And super quick comment, definitely, I'm the person in the questionnaire that says VR to everything, AR, watches, e-ink, paper, whatever. So I definitely don't think we should be stuck, let's say, in this. The goal is not to be stuck in yet another box, basically. So yeah, 100%.
A final comment on that, Fabien. The wall is a physical limited space. So in those two questions, or at least in those two comments, in one of these areas, I would like to, in a VR environment, I would be able to isolate one specific category of my wall and work specifically on that. And that specific category would have more room, and I would have kind of a folded version that I can get an overview from. So I can either dive in deep, where I can see maybe 100 files, or I can do an overview mode where I see, 2 or 3 of the most important subcategories, for example. And while yes, it is impressive to see something like that, it did take a while, but it's only one wall, right? So if I wanted to start something new, I had to take down everything after I finished that part. And that sucks because then I remove the possibility of seeing new connections that were in that previous wall. So I think that's the point that I wanted to get across. I want to have that space that I can go deep into one category, come out of that category, see an overview, and kind of swipe and have a new wall that I can put other things in. Maybe different. I don't want things to exist in that place or this place. I want things to exist there, here, because of the different possibilities that I can discover by reorganizing these contents. And obviously in VR, I would be able to have more than just blocks of text. I would be able to have, the whole multimedia experience. And I think that's the most valuable aspect of having something like that, but in VR.
So I 100% get it. That's why I started to work in VR in the first place a couple of years ago. So grabbing walls, putting them all, putting stuff on the wall, and then if you have to even move somewhere else, you don't have to throw the actual wall away. So yeah. 100% get it.
Well, I use mostly Adobe Illustrator, almost exclusively, so that I can make a wall, so to speak, on my large screen. And I can then duplicate it, name it, store it, duplicate it, give it a different name, start rearranging it. And that's one of the processes that I use for manipulating the chunks of information and the visual connections between them. One of the difficulties I look at your wall with, and I may be, I'll be not seeing it, but how it appears that most of the wall is matrices or lists rather than networks, which are connected by arrows or lines or something like that. Is that right, Raphael?
Sorry, yes, seeing connections and lines between things, of course. The things that Frode does in Author, I would definitely like to see that 100%, to see, the mind map of the content.
But that's something that's a limit in your wall.
Oh, definitely, 100%. It's
Yes.
It's a limit by design. Yes.
And it's not a limit in my use of Illustrator, for example. Although Illustrator has many other limitations.
Yes.
Which I would love to have overcome. But it does enable the analysis, that is the separation of things into different chunks of information of different kinds, and the rearranging of them, and the capturing of them into panels so that they can be, that I can go back and look at what I did 3 weeks ago. And they also enable me to print out because I have, at least in the before COVID, worked mainly with teams in person, so that we print out a wall, so to speak, a big Illustrator draft mural. And before that, what happens before, where did I get the information from that? I've gotten that from all sorts of parts of the process, but usually it's from memos or communications of other emails or something like that from various members of the team, or notes that I take during a discussion. That the team is actually trying to solve a problem. So that the mural then becomes an assembly and a summary of the overall series of discussions over many weeks, sometimes many months. And that different versions of it and different parts of it are shown to different parts of different sub teams of the project. So for me, it's interesting to be, and I have some structures. When I talk about information structures, I have some structures of not all little chunks are the same. There are classifications of kinds of chunks and what one can do with them. And these are very important to being able to, for example, in the Vision 2050 mural that many of you have seen here, the major chunk is a statement of requirements. That's what the sentences say in there. And then over on the right-hand side are statements of the ability to make evaluate over a 40-year period. So it's a statement of an objective and a criterion for that. So those are chunks. They're not just you can write anything you want to in a chunk. No, you cannot write anything you want to in a chunk, in a summary mural that you want to have help, that you want to help a team work together on. So those are, you know, you ask Frode and others asked, you know, what is some of the process that goes into making a mural? Well, those are some of the processes and some of the thoughts that I have, you know, and having worked on them. I'll stop for now. Happy to answer any questions.
I think that could be I see two ways to make this a bit more actionable in terms of potentially implementing it in VR or across devices. The first one is if you already have I don't know, a document that explains or showcase the process, but the honest process, not an idealization of it, to start from a blank wall or a blank mural based on a new topic. I think that could be interesting. Otherwise, a 5-minute time-lapse video, like starting for a blank either page on Illustrator or white wall. And I say this for Bob and Raphael, but for Peter and Frode, you also do something equivalent, not necessarily this way, but I think, and me too. So each and any of us is not just an exercise for others. It could be interesting to do this and summarize it as for example, I say 5 minutes, but a short time lapse to go from quote unquote nothing or the blank page or the blank thing to the actual result. And I think it, for example, to take Raphael's situation, not necessarily just screen sharing. And I think for Bob, it's the same for you, that you say you do it with Illustrator, but you also actually print the mural, and then you go toward it. You maybe would post it, or maybe somebody else give you a critic about this or that part, and you have to go back. So I don't think it's just in the screen. So maybe having a physical camera record that process and then illustrate it, that could also be quite interesting. And eventually, if to help make sure that everybody else understands such a process, is we could also do very short, like 1-hour workshop. We start with a random topic, can be, let's say, the Egypt Museum, or can be global warming, or of course it's going to be a bit vulgar or too short, but I think to really get the process and then being able to consider how to transfer only some of the steps, not the whole thing, to VR, that could be quite efficient. At least it would be interesting.
Yes, I think it would be. I'd be happy to participate.
Me too.
One of the things that, well, there's a pause here, I'll just say a bit more about the structuring of information. You've all seen I'm not in my studio right now, the mural that I did on nuclear waste disposal, which has been on the wall there. It has chunks of it on the left-hand side that describe the history of the nuclear age as it refers to nuclear waste, particularly, although to some degree in other aspects of the nuclear age. But it's a simple, you know, the chunks of information are simplifications of the history of the key attempt to be the key events. That's a different kind of chunk than the chunks in the middle of the mural, which have to do with what the goals of the agency are. That is to come up with a plan for the British nuclear waste. So there are statements of planning actions. Excuse me. And then over on the right, there is the plan itself. And so that these chunks are of a different kind of information. The sentences are different. One has to realize that. And that's what I'm describing as the structuring of information. That is the recognition and the identification of the different types of chunks. I also, one which I have not shared with this group that I know of, for the same agency, we did a completely different kind of mural. And the mural was an argumentation mapping, which is a different structuring of information and has different kinds of labeled chunks in it. It has 7 different kinds. They're described in all sorts of literature about the argumentation mapping stuff, and it's pretty widely spread around. But one has to have that kind of thinking to do really good analytic and synthetic work for teams of people who are really trying to solve the actual problems of the world. And so that, you know, and we haven't done the whole job by a long shot yet. But there are some, you know, there's some basic examples of this and some writings about it and so forth. So so again, that's, so how does a set of argumentation maps fit with the long timeline that has history, current situation, and future of nuclear waste disposal? How do those two things fit together for one agency doing some really important work? Is the kind of problem that you know, I think we must think that we're going to be addressing. I'll stop there again.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm finding this process quite frustrating. It's difficult to have this discussion today with, you know, Raphael thinks that VR isn't special, it's just a gradual thing. Peter thinks he will be getting sick sitting down VR. Bob doesn't have time. So 3 out of the 5 people today refuse to even put on a headset. And Bob, your knowledge is tremendous, but what you are talking about is, of course, how to use Illustrator, which is a 2D piece of software. So to try to move the conversation into what can VR unleash that isn't possible? I mean, it's nice that Raphael shows a map on his wall, and we can have certain discussions of what it means to move that around. But the actual act of either using your hands that are recognized with kind of a laser pointer in VR, or using it is a very specific thing. And for some reason, I don't think we often get to discuss the VR aspects of what we're doing. Very often we tend to go into maybe a specific interaction around how to fold a mural, which I think is important. But it's like every once in a while, there's a call for kind of a scenario or what we should really focus on. And that tends to drip off for a bit. So I'm not sure how we should structure things to move ahead. You know, you all very kindly filled in this form. We have 7 responses, so one other person has filled it in. But rather than having random talks, I don't know. I mean, Fabienne, you're the big VR experts. What do you think this group could contribute to your work, for example, if anything?
Yeah, like I mentioned a bit before, even though the time lapse of experts who structure information, and then I think we can do the work of imagining how that would translate to VR, to do it more naturally or better, or like those are which are the moment, for example, when there is new like a mini eureka moment, let's say, when by moving, by organizing, let's say, either different type of information or different bits of information, the structure emerge. And I think where it comes from, let's say, if it's from, it's the support itself and how it's done is not necessarily that important. Are they physical books? Are they post-it? Are they walls? Is it Illustrator? Is it another? Even is it through such conversations? Because in the end, that's what we tend to do. I think we have the conversation, and that's the capture discussion again. The conversation becomes so maybe like argument maps also. The conversation becomes so in depth and complex that we need some kind of medium, some kind of support to put some of it on it. So I think those help. And that's, I think, both the excitement and frustration we all feel. It's challenging, it's hard, but I think being hard is a good sign. We're digging into something that is important and not trivial. So I think time lapse somehow would help the most, because then it helped to decompose. I forgot the name, but there was a father, I think at the beginning of the 20th century, who used his 4 or 5 or 7 kids, I don't remember, at home, and he had like on the wall, he had like grids, and he was analyzing the movement of his kids on how they were doing any kind of task. The goal was a bit dark, in my opinion, because it was how to optimize workers in his factory. But that's a little bit how I see a time lapse of, let's say, designing a mural or making a wall, or even also writing a research paper. How do we take, let's say, bibliographic references and move them around or reshape them? So a time lapse of a complex task that does require structured information, and it's inclusive, that anybody who comes to this kind of meeting, I'm sure does, but do it differently. I think that could be the most helpful. And a quick note, sorry, but I was a VR quote unquote advocate for a couple of years when I started, and the only way that that worked for me was to physically be in front of the person, give them the physical headset, make them try it on, taking the time, could be 5 minutes, could be half an hour and whatnot. But talking about it never helped. And it can be frustrating because like you feel a bit like a prophet, like you've seen the future, you've seen the light or whatever you want to call it. But in the end, it tends to be, and no matter the enthusiasm, tend to be counterproductive.
Yeah, I mean, Raphael, you're next, and then Bob. But yeah, just the time lapse and all that is good. But I mean, when we talk about what important issues, like Bob now talked about nuclear waste disposal, of course, it's hugely important, as is climate change, you know. And you and me, Fabian, we're sitting here on a continent where there's an actual war on. You know, I have 9 people living in my house right now who escaped from that horror, right? So there are important things we need to deal with. But I'm tired of 2 discussions that I absolutely don't want anymore. One of them is PDF. PDF is part of the workflow. I don't want to hear the word PDF for months, unless it's how to actually have it as part of the workflow. It's such a waste of time. It will be illegal here. The other one is the whole, you know, kind of in and out of VR. Just like you said, Fabian, it is far from perfect. I don't even use the headset that much, right? But it has a promise of an entirely new dimension. And you know, it is not, Peter, with all due respect, it's not like you look at and you move a 3D thing on a screen. It has absolutely no bearing on that. You know, when Mark comes out of what he's dealing with now, whatever that is, I look forward to seeing Nodal in VR. And I can promise you what he's managed to do will feel completely different in that environment than, you know, the recording that he will be able to show. So it really comes down to this thing that I've been pushing for weeks. And, you know, we are such different brains in this group with such different mentalities. My way of doing it is to write an exciting story. Some people call it not professional. Some people call it hyperbole, you know, in the group, not any of you guys. But, you know, it makes me very stressed that we can't dream properly together, right? I mean, like Bob, your contribution, the way we just talked about, to have that, you know, try to figure out a way to mock up some of, okay, how can Bob actually do this in VR? Because the thing you have, that we don't have is the experience of doing these things professionally, you know, so that is very valuable. But to go through it, you know, anyway, yeah, Raphael, yeah, sorry, I'm ranting a bit.
No problem. Let me lower my hand. Yeah. So on the, I would love to, you know, take this opportunity to put, or to come to terms with VR with you. The things that I've been saying is because of the, you know, the current state of VR. And don't interrupt me yet, Frode, please. Give me a minute. I think VR is incredible. I love VR, but the current state, the technology that is being applied to VR is like a very old game with crappy 3D graphics. If we had the budget of getting an architect, a 3D artist, an illustrator, an animator, we could make beautiful things in VR. But the current state is that people are just putting these digital documents in this environment thinking that it's going to solve problems, and it is not going to. That's where my frustration comes from. It's more of a frustration. It's more of a frustration rather than not believing in VR. I 100% believe in VR, and I want to get to a world where we have VR and AR and all of these augmentations. I want to, you know, do things like Minority Report. I want to have my own personal Jarvis to, you know, ask things and it'll give me the answers. But with this current team that we have, it's more a team of intellectuals and not a team of creators or artists. Even though I know you come from an arts background and you are an artist, but we need a team that will make the things nice to look at and nice to be in. And that's only going to be possible with time and with an actual budget. Before that, I think we can only discuss the theories of the implementations. And an example to that, a very simple example to that is any game that Blizzard Entertainment does, their 3D is very low poly. It's not a very detailed 3D, but they have an amazing skin of illustration on top of 3D. So even if we could create, you know, this environment where people are going to have an experience inside, thinking about Egypt, it would be amazing to see, you know, a first point of view of this experience being there. But to create that, we need artists, we need 3D artists, we need architects, and we need illustrators.
Yeah, okay, right. So a couple of things. First of all, VR is not so much about the graphics as it is about the interaction. And what I mean by that is not only poly count and all of that stuff. I also mean, you know, when you look through a fence, if you want to see the other side, you move your head, so the fence kind of disappears. It's the same in VR. The more you move, and naturally move, you get a sense of what you're dealing with, and the perceived resolution goes up tremendously. But we're not designing for the current headsets. We're designing for what will be available in a year or in a year and a half, right? Everything available now, we view that as a prototype. But it is not good quality. I completely agree with that. And when it comes to the art side of things, once we start having a bit of workflow, yes, several of us would love to start building things. But a lot of the things that need to be built, I mean, it would be really nice to have, especially your room in VR. That would be really, really nice. And that will be an aspect of it. But the actual, how do you open a document? What does that actually mean in VR? You know, these are fundamental questions that don't exist in any other medium. And we haven't even really gotten a dialogue on that. So to have philosophical discussions on this, until we've been in there, until we've tried to do that, becomes not as rich as they could be. But yeah, Bob.
Well, I want to, you know, we departed from what Fabian was saying to discuss not discussing PDFs and stuff like that. And I wanted to follow up with what Fabian had said, and that being one of the ways of having a continuous, a little bit more continuous discussion. And his interaction then, or his statements then, were made me think that working together, that our working together on a project, on some simple project, and probably, I certainly like the Egyptian project, because enough things will come up in the creation of some material about the history. There will be history that we will have, and there will then be the question of history, things that interest me, like the creation of historical chunks. How does one write history in different ways? And hence, how does one write history in different ways in virtual reality? And also, there will be arguments about it. So one could have structured arguments about it. And then the question is, how does one have structured arguments in virtual reality, which interests me. And so, we could, and even lacking budget, if we devote the time to it, actually try working this out, not necessarily in virtual reality, although maybe some of you are, can take what we've done and put it in virtual reality. We can see what it looks like, but it would really help us, I think, to work together. And I love the Egyptian potential example. It sounds like, although I haven't heard it directly, that Ismail would be, helping us to fund such a project, and or even get it started, or get a pilot started going, or something like that. Anyway, that's that's what I wanted to follow up with Fabian's comment.
I agree with the specific, doing something specific, and I also agree that the Egyptian thing could be interesting, but we have to figure out a way to get some kind of coherence in this group, because last week Alan said we shouldn't do the Egyptian thing because suddenly you're doing someone else's work, which is actually important. So when Christopher said there's a difference between a curated and non-curated, that was interesting. And then I send the document to all of you. Mark Anderson comes back with saying, this is too much hyperbole. There is, this doesn't necessarily support the data. We don't have enough data yet. It is a slog. We're all here spending our own time. Everybody's here volunteers, right? But we got to support each other. And so far, with some exceptions, most of it is just how clever we are for shooting things down, to be honest, right? And that's the opposite of what you did, Bob. You were positive now, so that's why I can use you as an example to bounce off, because I'm certainly not putting that. But if we could, I sent out the survey today because I'm trying to think of how do we agree on what to do, right? It's so hard. How do communities like this, we are all politically, we're all slightly on the left. We're most certainly not on the right. And the reason I say that is because right-wing people tend to be angry, and they tend to be unified over a fight. We must make sure people can't have an abortion or whatever it is, and they will do lots of things, and they will fight very hard, and they will get it done. Leftists save the world through all these different things are always disorganized. How can we manage to say, we've decided for this year, it's about VR. Decided it's work, predominantly text. How can we actually work together?
I want to just remind you that we have a mutual admiration society, and that last week I said that the document that you produced was the visionary document on, that was about VR, but was, used Egypt as a kind of example, was really inspirational.
Oh yeah, no, I'm grateful for that, Bob. And I'm talking after you now, because you have been very positive about that, and you have been positive about finding projects. But I'm talking in general. you know, how do we, this is not at all targeted at you, Bob. It's targeted to the community in general, especially the people who are not here, because they're not here. It makes it harder to have this discussion. You know what I mean?
Yes, but a question for me, and this is sort of happening in both projects that discussions that I'm having with another project, is we kind of agree on the vision. So what do we do next? Well, we work on something more specific. That's what we do. And when we do that, and we have to, of course, agree on what that is, but that has to be a focused discussion on that.
Yeah.
And then we agree on it, and then we work on it, and what happens is that we learn from it. We learn a lot from it, and a lot of the philosophical questions that we've been discussing for weeks and weeks and weeks come up in a practical way.
Yeah, well, I absolutely. Peter.
Okay, I think the most exciting thing for me about VR was when I was reading that book, Cyberspace First Steps, that I've cited to you a few times in the past, where it was describing the unfolding of different spaces and the idea of having the location in the space corresponding to multidimensional query search terms. And I've never seen any of the VR examples pursue that direction. Everything's always, nice Second Life-ish models of buildings and riding roller coasters and theme parks. And to my mind, they're completely missing the value of the third dimension beyond entertainment and simulating things that already exist in the real world. So I strongly recommend, if you haven't read that book, try to track down a copy, read those chapters that are speculating on what you could do with the cyberspace kind of interface. And that's also why I keep trying to bring it back to text and language, because after all, ancient Egypt didn't wind up taking over the world with its hieroglyphic systems. Modern Chinese have a horrible time dealing with all of the tens of thousands of ideograms that represent the full language, and they have to come up with fallbacks that are more linguistic based and sound oriented queries to the system. So you start typing in a phonetic representation of what the term is in order to have the system help you by finding the appropriate picture glyph to inject into your writing. It's very interesting looking at those systems for alternate input devices for Oriental languages.
Okay,
Mac has a very nice
Peter, going.
I keep going back to text and how we can have the text driving the 3D interaction, as opposed to trying to do everything with direct manipulation alone, because it doesn't really work when you start dealing with tens of thousands of entities.
You're making an assertion with that last statement. You don't know that. How do you make a snowball? Those are tens of thousands of flakes of snow, right?
Yeah, but I'm not trying to manipulate the individual flakes of snow. That's just take the whole aggregate and smush it together.
No, but
you have to, if you're dealing with real world problem with real world teams of decision makers who are doing that. You have to deal with those.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you have to deal with things in aggregate, and you anyway. That's kind of a by the by. Fabian, you've been waiting long enough. Sorry.
So I mentioned a bit the parliament at the beginning. Now I'm going to talk a bit more about my job. My job is being a prototypist. So I build stuff, no matter what that is. It usually is about VR and AR on the web, but it can be about ink, could be even more traditional stuff, but it's about building stuff. So going to be a bit personal there, but my father asked me something a couple of days ago. He wanted a video about a retrospective of something. And he asked me how to do this and that. And then I told him, you take the documents you have, you take your phone and you record it and you turn the pages. It's 100% not what he had in mind, but it's a first step. And it's a first step that always makes people uncomfortable because it's so far from the actual end result they had imagined. But it's something that's why I said that's my job. It's something that I do all the time, and it's something that I believe I do it because not because I like to make people uncomfortable, because I think it's genuinely valuable. And I think despite the discomfort, it's valuable because it works. You build stuff by building stuff. And here, I think we need to build stuff. I suggest, and it's going to be frustrating, it's going to be hard, it's going to be disappointing, honestly. I deal with frustration a lot because there is a lot of intellectual masturbation and things that are like way too far not feasible, and then you have something, but at least you have something you can poke at, criticize, build on top. So I think we need to start now. I think we need to build something. It doesn't mean being, how you say, to stop caring about the big idea or the imagination, but it's to learning by doing. And we have some people here with a process, we have a topic. I personally think global warming unifies everyone. It's a big challenge. It doesn't have the monetary aspect in the sense that we don't have to hope that it will pay at some point. And it's still a great showcase, and it relies people. It's really hard. I can't imagine somebody who doesn't want to join and help to support this cause. So I suggest, just a suggestion, but having a time lapse from Bob, from Raphael, from Fred, from Peter, from whoever wants to have a flow process with an empty wall, just a silly 5 minutes, 10 minutes, either screen sharing or recording or video camera, all those, and then use that to start to do something that's going to be frustratingly disappointed, not as far-fetched, but a step. That was my pitch.
And you're actually suggesting climate change, is that what I heard?
Yes, yes.
I would agree. I would happily agree with that. And I have warning for everybody. I have 10 murals. They're old, but the structure for thinking about climate change is there.
But it would have to be genuinely new. Sorry to challenge that, but starting from something white, and then you can still reuse, of course, all your expertise and knowledge and the information you gathered, but it would have to start from something new.
As long as I can then say, all right, what we should fill this whiteboard with is what we already, what the structures we already know about how to think about it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
I'm with you on that. I like it.
What workflow are you thinking about, Fabian? If you look at the little survey that I sent out, are we talking about building a timeline, a mural, a document? What kind of thing? Or a knowledge graph? Or
actually, so I think it's more the tooling than the outcome. So it might be managing the different pieces of what the result will be. Maybe the result will be any of these. I put, I think, documents in this because I thought it was more encompassing and had like everything in it. So, but honestly, I'm saying this. I don't want to sound or to be pushy, but I think let's say I say, I don't know, document, and I'm wrong, and that's perfectly fine. But at least by trying it, by pushing it, and we'll see. It was stupid, didn't make sense, but we have learned this and this and that by attempting. I don't claim to be right about anything except the process of attempting.
Oh, except what? I missed that.
Except the process of attempting, just trying it. This I'm pretty confident.
Good.
so obviously climate change is probably the most important issue facing our species. There's no question about that in my mind, at least. But what kind of aspect of climate change are you talking about this being thought about or discussed? Is it how to alleviate it? And if so, is it to find which sector to focus on, or is it how to implement it? Because it's a big furball of a problem, of course.
A wicked problem, right, Bob?
It's a wicked problem, yes. And I have a chapter in my wicked problem book, which is on the web, which says that to address a really mega mess that we have, which is climate change, we need multiple ways of looking at it. We need timelines, we need dashboards, We need ways to evaluate and so forth. And there are drafts that are now 5 to 10 years old, but the structuring of them is still important and could be updated, and the world needs it. There isn't a place where we can go and get all of this in a coherent way, or even semi-coherent way. It doesn't solve the problem, but it gives us a platform for thinking about the multiple views, which we discuss all the time here. And I think virtual reality will help us handle these multiple views, because we can't, the 8 or 10 murals that I have would fill 8 or 10 of Raphael's walls, and in virtual reality we can move them around and switch between them and link them and so forth in ways that we could not do in Raphael's studio, as big as it is.
Yeah, I mean, if we had a huge budget, I think it would be very worthwhile, because I can instantly see things like having a 3D globe where you can have different overlays of different environmental data, and you can do timelines and connect and so on. I could see that kind of thing being extremely useful. I think, though, we should probably try to do something simpler, something like a Raphael wall, but in virtual reality. How do we even reach those pieces? How do we chunk them? A lot of that can be really, really helpful. And it may be the initial problem can be, what are we going to make a demo? So we're really dog fooding. We try to write out the different elements, because I think we should try a few small things, because basically in VR as it is today, there aren't many tools that are defined. We have drag and drop on a desktop. In VR, we don't really have the same kind of thing yet. We have laser hands and all kinds of weird stuff. I think we need a few more stepping stones. I don't know, Fabian, what do you think?
So in terms of, I don't know if we should talk about budget until we have one. I'm not saying we shouldn't have a budget, but until we do have one, I'm afraid we're going to scare ourselves from what is possible. And for example, for the murals, and also to come back on the starting from a white wall or white mural, we can still have the history of the murals that's been done before. We can all insert them, dozens of them, hundreds of them, doesn't really matter. And in the end, it's free in the sense that, yeah, we don't have to print them. So we can still have to keep a history of it. But I don't want, I think we can, if the premise is, and that's also maybe something, the prototype, in my opinion, should be a tool to help structure information on the topic of, for example, global warming. And the outcome or the output of that tool could be something actionable by people who will try to consume that document. So for example, they make an action that is, I'm going to see my legislator, or I'm going to use less gas, or I'm doing whatever. It doesn't, I'm just saying silly example, but I think that should be a document, for example, regardless of the format, that translate to an action. So it's not too theoretical, but I think the different processes of how to produce that document, it would probably be more interesting if it's not just Bob's process, or just Raphael's process, or just your process from, but that we learn from each of our processes. And I'm sure there are some steps that we all do about structuring information. Again, at some point you mentioned storytelling and how to shape the story. I imagine it's through reading, through conversation, and at some point synthesizing some of those, finding link through the different sources or document that helps to build that new understanding. So I think it's, I don't want to advocate, let's say, one process of another. And that's why I think having the different, and also I think to get everybody actually involved, not somebody in the back that doesn't want to participate because their process or part of their process is not represented. And I'm quite confident that there will be little steps that can transform to tools in each of our processes. For example, manipulating a bibliography, or structuring based on the position on a mural, or actually printing a card and then sticking it on a physical wall. So I think everybody should be, and I say this, shooting myself in the foot, that I don't actually know what my own process is. I know I have a process to do stuff, but and I am a little bit afraid of it. I don't want to record my screen and show you guys how I work, because a lot of it is, I don't know, random or not correct or not formalized and everything. So I say this again from a place of naivety or candor. I don't ever know how I work, and I'm afraid of trying to think about it. But I think if I'm genuine about transforming this kind of things to tools that help to structure information and to think better and deeper, then hopefully that would be part of it.
Well, there are only 3 of us left here now, it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, we should definitely look at, I mean, structuring information is obviously an important part of thinking. So, you know, in principle, that's a good idea. You know, we don't have a VR room we can just go in and do it in. So we have to decide on some initial constraints, whether that's a wall or whatever it might be. And then, yeah. But specifically then, Fabian, you just want to start recording examples of the community doing that type of activity?
Yes, and it doesn't, and media independent, meaning that it doesn't have to be just a screen, doesn't have to be just a wall. It can include VR. Some of us are already using VR as part of the process, but it has to be everything. And I think, for example, I imagine some of us have post-it note on the side of our screen with reminders or things like this, and being genuine or honest about it. Like we always, I think it's when information bleeds out of the medium that there is an opportunity.
I don't actually do that very much because I'm not in that stage of my life. So I would probably not be a good example. And I have had to redesign Author because there are some limitations in the mapping and glossary system, but I haven't been able to get Jacob to implement that yet. So I would be a bad example, but in principle, yeah, good idea.
But what do you mean you're not in that stage now, and you don't have information that somehow you don't feel has a place or is hard to organize? Or
I feel that I mean, I do read primarily books, and that's generally to get things just into my head. So the book that we've been going on about, the one Brandel mentioned, I am thinking of taking notes and putting that as a resource article in our journal, some of the highlights. But that's kind of a straight transfer, so to speak. But when it comes to jokingly solving a murder or learning something for a class, I'm not doing that. So I've just finished my PhD in December. I mean, right now, we should probably do what you're talking about to write about VR. Maybe that in itself, actually, because that is something I am actually trying to learn about, aspects of that. So maybe, because remember I said earlier in the call that maybe we should make like a guide for authors and TV producers and working in VR. Maybe we can kind of semi-jokingly build that. That is our thing. We don't need to call it a guide for TV producers. Sorry, Bob, just finished. Sorry. Something like what we're building is a guide for working in VR.
I'm uninterested in working on that particular topic, but others may very well be. What I would be interested in, I'm always interested in reading an outline or a summary of a book that you think is important for us to know about, because so many books are so overwritten that even while they contain really important stuff, that it takes huge amounts of time to read them, and having summaries of the book, the key ideas, the key example here and there and so forth, done in outline, hopefully in sort of outline form rather than essay form, is a enormously useful tool for me to think of, to use in my thinking. I do it whenever I can. I've got, I've been doing it for some of the other projects, for example.
Sorry, I'm not sure if I understood you. Could you say what you would be interested again, Bob?
Oh yeah. You said that you were thinking of potentially writing a summary or the main ideas of this book that you think is really important. I'd love to read that. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, I mean that's a very traditional kind of task, and I'm glad you would read it. I'll put it in the journal if I do it. So that would be good there. But in terms of okay, I honestly think that one thing I wanted to do for this issue of the journal is write a list of all the aspects of VR, such as what you saw. Hang on, share screen for a quick second here. So not this document. Right, so I wrote a little list here and I just put it in here, like this kind of stuff. What kind of scenarios are there? What kind of things could there be in a VR room? So for instance, timeline, layouts, under that, there would be layouts.
Yep.
And how to add, how to remove, to just make this sprawling set of questions. And then as each issue of the journal, if we have learned something, we go to that section and we add. We found that with the timeline, layouts that do this and this are better than, or more effective than those that do the other thing, whatever. So, so that the act of what we're working on is working in VR, for instance. I don't know.
Yeah. I have to be confess that I have not looked at the journal because but I will take a look at it, and I hopefully will see that it is divided into very small chunks, and the chunks are labeled with headlines in bold or something.
Yeah, so the journal looks a little bit like
Yes.
this, whereas here's issue, no, that's one. So normal table of contents.
Yep.
And it's very chunked. So the whatever guest presenter we have, and we also have to decide on who's coming up next, is human transcribed with the dialogue. There's also some great stuff here when we get further in. So Fabian did visual meta in VR. So here's an example of what he extracted. And on the left, you can see the experiment that Adam did with adding dates in for your mural.
Yeah.
You can see Bob Horn's mural by Brandel. There's a little bit of immersed, who came to talk to us.
Mm-hmm.
So, we are building things in here. Brandel doing a test of using .liquid to have things in. This is a full article based on his tweets, another proper article. He's doing Zettelkasten, which of course is relevant to this. And then we have this resources and news section where books and websites and so on are linked.
Uh-huh. Well,
That's it.
good. Okay. Thank you.
Very simple stuff, really. Trying to keep it simple anyway.
Yeah.
Oh, I see you have your hand up, Fabienne. Please go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was thinking a bit earlier, you mentioned how, from a VR developer perspective, how can the group best help me to implement something? I think the biggest, and what reminded me of that was when you were sharing your screen at some point, you share timeline, you started to type layout, and I was starting to think, in my opinion, layout should be the top category. Within it, there should be everything else like timeline, graph, etc. So different way to represent information based on their types, for example, the most, and it's a little bit, again, a teaser for the presentation I started to work on for this group on how a librarian, what if a librarian can move walls around, is what type of information is interesting to represent in VR or manipulate or find structure for in VR, because not necessarily everything is. And then if there is a mapping between that type of information and a visual representation. For example, if it's timeline, maybe a horizontal list you can walk through is the most interesting. If it's a graph, is it something that still goes around you? If it's a graph that evolves over time, is it something that looks a bit more like a city and then you can go through so that it's stable enough? So I think to me, that's the challenge. That's the question. With what type of information get what type of visual and manipulable, because as you say, it's not just about seeing the stuff, it's being manipulated, especially if we're looking for a structure, because maybe what's been displayed is not good enough in the sense that it can be summarized or synthesized or even criticized. So yeah, to me, that would be the challenge. And I hope, let's say, if we do a little exercise or prototype based on, again, for example, global warming, that would be one of the lessons learned, that mapping.
Mhm.
I think,
Sorry, just to bounce back, because I think otherwise, if we don't do this, everything is a studio, meaning every time we have a new challenge or new information or even type of information, we start everything from scratch. And it can be like a video game style and everything, which is of course feasible. And I think what most people are doing today, but then it doesn't scale. We can't like just drag a document, get some type and then display. So I think that's also both a challenge and why it's useful and impactful.
yeah, I mean, one thing that I thought of in terms of a goal, as in the whole point of this group, is that at the end of the year, we'll have Future of Text 3. You know, Future of Text 1 was called a 2020 vision because it was in 2020, subtitled. The other one was a second look, even though I didn't put that anywhere. If we make the third one 3D as kind of a joke, because it's the third book, but if we really focus, as we already have started, on VR, work in VR, text work in VR, then making the book itself, making the journal itself really can be uniquely useful, because even though climate change is, of course, more important, there are so many places people can go to learn about that. However, there aren't any really good coherent set of resources to learn about work in VR. And I think we could be a helpful pioneer. And if we do that well, then what we learn can be implemented by those who are really working on climate change.
I think it's, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think it's more interesting, but it's harder. I think it's going to sound completely ridiculous, but just climate change is actually easier, because otherwise we start to get meta, we start to think about this, and also it's, again, in terms of appeal or audience, it's smaller. But honestly, that working about VR as a medium and using this as the challenge is maybe more interesting in this bubble, let's say, or in this sphere.
Hang on, just give me 1 second.
Harder. Yeah.
That was a great point. Just give me 1 second. I have to go to the door. Sorry.
Maybe we're getting somewhere after all.
Maybe. Maybe.
It is a challenging process.
Well, you know, I'm happy to start with your whiteboard, but and you understand that that when I come in to help you with your whiteboard, I come in loaded with other information murals that
Yes.
that comprehensively, you know, that have 5 dashboards already done,
Of course.
that are based on other people's work, serious people's work. Sometimes a committee of 2,000 scientists work, and we, you know, so I'm always interested in building on other people's shoulders. But you know,
Of course.
I understand starting afresh for a group is also really helpful.
Yes. Yeah. It's for the metaphor. It's there is no whiteboard. There is no empty page. There is always history behind it. So it's more like a checkpoint for people who get on board to be able to understand.
Yeah. That's a good metaphor. Thank you. Yeah.
I think, Fabienne, you had a good point there. It will be easy to spiral into meta. But while we think about that, the questions would be, why do a climate change VR thing? Would it be with the goal of helping a scientist do a model, or to persuade a climate skeptic, or to draw up ways to alleviate it? What would be the goal of the creation? You know, to help anchor it in a way.
I think if we want to be a bit efficient, it's whatever most people in the group would be most excited by. I would think for me, maybe helping the scientific process is more exciting, but that's just me.
And for me, I may have missed it in various places, but there are various places that attempt to summarize for wider populations the data and the ideas and so forth of climate change. And you know, I don't think that we would be trying to help the IPCC or necessarily organize their long reports, which they come out with every other year or so. But for me, there hasn't been easy visualizations of different aspects of climate change that the world could get to and look at and criticize and change and so forth. So, you know, that display, which is what I've tried to begin to put together, but of course, as an individual, from some of the teamwork that I've done, but also then as an individual in between teams that I was working with. I've stopped doing that up to now because I just don't have the time and energy to devote to it anymore. But I would, you know, I would contribute where I could in whatever goal that you know, this group decided. But it would be aimed at, you know, Fabien's whiteboard would be aimed at learning something from our interaction that we would want to use and have learned from to do it in virtual reality.
Yeah, so
that's the purpose.
So the point of this community, as I see it, is to do 2 things. It is to highlight that virtual reality is coming in a big way, and we should learn how to work in there, not just play. That's one. Second one is provide some specific usable examples of that. Of course, we're discussing both points now. That's good. But you know, if we had a massive budget, even then, I think this would be a challenge, because if we're supporting scientists, they will need to be able to import data. And we're already seeing the issues that Mark had importing CSV files into Nodal. You know, so that would be a huge thing. I obviously, Fabian, you would know much more about that. But also, if it is for the general public, I think the general public is split in two camps. One, it's not real, or it is real, and I'm going to go protest. I don't think there are that many people who are kind of on the fence to want to learn more of the details. For instance, my wife and I, we deeply care about this, which is why we drive an electric car, have solar panels and all of that stuff. But I don't actually have an interest in knowing the details. You know, we want to try to do what we can, but I'm not going to study it as a scientist. So that's why I'm wondering about the kind of the target group.
So sorry, but I want to interrupt metaphorically and here literally. It doesn't matter. Like climate change, because just like an hour ago, we're discussing climate change versus Egypt. So in the end, we can even flip a coin and say it's for scientists or for general audience, and blah, blah, blah. So I don't want to be aggressive or vulgar there. Of course, I don't mean it this way, that it doesn't matter. I don't want to interrupt, but it's just like, this is one of the challenge of prototyping, that you need to focus on what the actual novel thing, and we don't want to reproduce. And if it's CSV that is tricky, then we use JSON. We take shortcuts all the time, and it's going to feel again dirty, but we need to get that nugget of what is actually new. Otherwise, yeah, we spend time discussing on things that are super interesting, but don't actually support the goal.
Right. So thinking right now, I think one thing that we could maybe do is, this is just me being very concrete, build a index card on the wall system that is primarily focused at connecting pieces of information about climate change. It may turn out that that is entirely the wrong kind of work tool, and we change that. But if we make it for, we decided we're not doing, so essentially it's a mural, but a highly interactive.
We could do that on in the software Mural, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean,
we could work that as if we were actually going to work together.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that if we do something that I'm envisioning now, it would be, at the very most superficial, be lots of index cards.
Yeah, right.
On a plane, right?
Yeah, they're post-it notes in Mural, but they're you know, right. Just call you know, I don't know, the LeBeau, our friend David LeBeau calls them snippets. It doesn't matter what we call them.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to call them.
They're big. They're square, and you can make them bigger or smaller and put different size of type in them. That's what they are.
Yes. Right. So we have these things in a 2D shape on the wall, and they can be, as you said, there will be different information. A lot of it will be text-based. It'll be simple headings.
Sure.
So if we start doing that, then obviously we have to decide on a huge range of issues while prototyping. Number one, how do you save a layout so you can come back to it later?
Well, Miro does it, doesn't it? I mean, if we have to use some sort of platform to do that, right?
No, we're talking about building a platform to do that.
So let me share something.
Oh, I'm out. No, I'm out of here. No, I don't think so.
So can you see my screen?
Yeah.
So that was 2 years ago, more or less. I'm in VR. The content doesn't come from VR. There are 2D pages. I move around and I can, you see the to-do, done, etc., like Kanban style. And then on the top right, and it's social. So for example, if Bob, you don't want to be in VR, you don't have to. You can still add content. And then when I select on the top, I don't know if you noticed, but it switched from one type of layout to another. So here it's a kind of pyramid, and after it was a kind of list. So they're all building blocks. There are ways to do this. Again, prototyping, ugly, imperfect, cannot import an exotic file format or something. But we have already some good basis for this kind of things.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really, really good. And that is exactly what I'm talking about, because if we were to restrict it to one wall rather than many, I'm just saying if, then it may be easier to share for different people to work on it, because you can take it into different spaces. And also, I really want to, for my own sanity, to be able to continue what Brandel has started by taking the glossary terms from author into VR. So once we start having different ways,
just do it. We can talk about it over and over again, but just do it.
Bob, A, it costs money.
Yeah.
B, I need to have my programmer available. He has been available for 6 months.
Oh, I see. All right. So I get it.
It's not super simple, and I've already spent basically the family fortune as it was on this. So I have to be careful. But what I'm saying in support of Fabien is that if we do exactly what he's talking about, exactly what he showed, which I think we should do, that in itself would provide, I can fight to have my data in there, and then he can see if he thinks it's relevant. That's how we make a system open, that we have obviously more than one party wanting to interact with it. So it's not just a silo. And also real interaction problems will appear, like he showed how to save it on the button on the screen. Maybe we can think of something more gestural or sculptural or elegant, which is what I see his other work is about. So I can see you shaking your head, Fabian. I know exactly that's what you're working on.
Before we go, we're almost at 9:59 my time. I want to know what has happened with Ismail and the Egyptian thing. Are we dropped that? Are we
Well, this is I don't know, because first of all, for me to find out even who wanted to be in the document saying who we are has taken a month. It's crazy, right?
Okay.
But that's done, and it's stored, and we have to decide as a group what to do. I think that even though Alan was really annoying, and I hope he will listen to me, I'm not talking behind his back. It was really annoying coming in with no audio, not often being here, because he has a real job. He's busy, obviously. Coming in saying it's a bad idea. His point was actually really good. We don't want to just suddenly do a project for them that has nothing to do with the real work we're doing. That is a real concern. So the kind of thing we talked about right now, if it turns out that there's interest in this community to do Egyptian, fine, let's do Egyptian in this manner that Fabien showed. It doesn't have to be climate change, as he said, it can be anything. And if the Egyptian Museum is interested in seeing our prototype and say, this is amazing, keep doing what you're doing open, but we'll support it, that would be great. But I completely agree, we shouldn't pitch to do like we're an agency and we're doing an ad for these people.
Quick remark. So first I'll have to go in a minute, but more importantly, again, climate change, or let's imagine climate change is for scientists, whatever, is a way to start. It's a prompt, it's an excuse. But if, let's say, next week there is potentially funding for the Egyptian project, and we discover that it's functionally equivalent to the other one, we can learn just as much and do it more efficiently because there is some funding. And that's it, switching to that. It's just a way to start.
Yeah,
right.
And the question is, how what is the interaction with Ismail? What is he saying? Is he saying I can get some funding for you, or is he not? I don't know.
He is saying that he is involved with this. He's not one of the main people. They are doing a Microsoft HoloLens thing, we found out.
Oh.
Right, but they do have a budget of $500 million to build this thing. It'll be the largest museum in the world.
Yeah, I know about the museum. I know, and I have been at the library in Alexandria. I do know Ismail. That's why I'm asking.
I know, and I'm trying to answer, Bob. I'm trying to give you all the information I have. And that is, he hasn't promised anything, but when I sent the little dream piece or whatever we want to call it, he was also excited and wondered what was possible with this. So now that we've had this conversation, and my summary of this conversation is the three of us, to talk to the rest, we have agreed we're going to work on means to think with stuff put on walls index card, murder wall, whatever, basically what Fabienne showed. And then if that is of interest to the museum later on, we will show it to them. But Fabienne, can I ask you to do a reply all to the group, send that tweet with that animation, and say that towards the end of the call today, these are the things we're talking about, so people will be a little bit primed for Monday?
Yeah, can do that.
Thank you. So on Monday, we have a very interesting and very different presentation. Phil from Scholarcy, let me just look at my own calendar and make sure I'm not making a big mistake here. Yes, Phil from a company called Scholarcy, he's a friend. What they do, they analyze academic documents so they can automatically do summations, quality controls, comparisons, all kinds of magical stuff. It has nothing to do with VR, and of course it's text-based, but I think that the kind of data they can give us can allow us to have things on these cards, if it's referring to something, instead of just having another one come through the references, amazing magical stuff can happen.
Yep.
It is very impressive what they have. So we really need to be there and interrogate the hell out of them.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry, I probably will not be able to attend on Monday. So got many other things to do.
That's fine.
But I will try to follow up to see what, see what he said.
Okay, fantastic. And Fabian, you'll send that email, is that cool, to the group?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
What is the guy's name? What is the company's name or something?
Scholarcy. I'll give you I sent you an email about it just now, one that I'd written earlier. I just popped it out a few minutes ago. Scholarcy.com.
Oh, okay, good, thank you.
So I'll put it in text chat here, scholarcy.com.
Scholarcy. Okay, yeah, I've got it in my email. Thank you.
Excellent.
Right, great.
I have wanted to use their stuff for my own software for quite a while, but I haven't been able to get the right kind of use case. Maybe we can do something amazing here.
Yeah.
Okay, gotta run, but
Have a good weekend, guys.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
bye-bye.
Bye for now.